Last night, I spent the evening at an old friend's house across town. We don't live in a city, but it's not all country either. However, there's a good stretch of unlit roads, and you'd be hard-pressed to call this anything more than a town. I am a responsible and healthy fellow, so knowing I'd be having a few beers, I decided to walk over there after work, hoping my fiancée would be able to pick me up after, and knowing that, if not, I should probably get more cardio in anyway. It was a typical Friday night with beers, campfire and the guys, which was a weekly occurrence for us to get away from our respective significant others for some time. Before long, it was well after midnight, I denied my friend's offer to crash on his couch and began to walk home, shooting my fiancée a text to update her on my plans as I left, and hoping she'd still be awake to provide a ride. No such luck. It's a pretty long walk, about 35 minutes, but there are sidewalks and street lamps most of the way, so it's not unbearable. I buttoned up my coat, said my goodbyes, and got walking. It was brisk, but I didn't mind it, and had a nice buzz going along with my coat to keep me warm, as it is the typical plan when walking home after a night out. I put my headphones in and just kinda spaced out as I traveled, occasionally checking my phone for texts. This wasn't the kind of town you needed to worry about getting jumped in. In fact, it's the kind of place where the only reason you'd want your headphones off is in case a friendly neighbor yelled to offer you a ride. I stayed in my spaced out phase until I had to pass the wood, which is a particularly dark stretch of road. There is a sidewalk on one side, with a handful of street lamps pooling light in front of houses, but on the other is a pretty thick stretch of woods, with no light, no houses and no developments. It's basically a swamp that's too expensive to build on. Every time I get to this strip, I tend to perk up a bit, and not because I'm worried about some ghoulish creature grabbing me from the woods, but because of the drunk drivers. This stretch of road is long, straight and dark, a perfect place for young drivers to think they should rev up their engines. At least once a year, some kid is struck by a car here, usually by a fellow high schooler partying late at night. Occasionally, small crosses and bouquets of flowers will be left near the sites of their accidents as constant reminders. So when I thought I heard a quick honk of a horn behind me, I was ready and basically jumped off the sidewalk and onto the lawn of the house I was in front of, pulling out my headphones in the process. I turned to throw the finger at whoever would be blowing by me in their car. There was nothing there. I stood up and looked around. Pulling out my headphones really heightened the silence of the night, and heard the cracking of the trees in the wood as the wind swept through them. Down the road, both ways I could see nothing, save for the pinpoints of darkness on both ends where my sight could not reach. Chalking it up to a nervous imagination, I took one last look down the road, put my headphones back in, walking in between the pools of yellow light down the sidewalk. It wasn't 2 minutes before I thought I heard it again. It didn't get as startled this time, and not seeing headlights merely looked behind me to check for cars. Still nothing, I popped my headphone back in my ear and continued my journey. A loud honk popped in my ear so close behind me I swear I could feel the movement of the air from the horn. I turned and swung. I'm not sure at what, but landed nothing. I regained my balance and immediately pulled out my headphones, ready for anything. There was nothing, save for the wind and darkness of the night around me. That time, I knew I wasn't imagining. The honk wasn't like a car horn, but like a kid's bike horn. The thought of one of those punks dressed up as a clown immediately crossed my mind, but forced a smile instead, making me realizing how foolish I was being. I was alone. Seeing no reason to stop, I began walking again, headphones in. I had gotten back into the groove of my music when I heard a slight squeak from behind me. Figuring at this point it was a car, and already scared twice, I wasn't too surprised. That's when I saw what may be hands down the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. A glimpse of movement caught my eye to the left, and I turned, expecting some automobile filled with high school kids. Instead, was a fully grown man, dressed up in a cartoonish clown costume, patiently cycling a child's tricycle down the dark. He didn't look over, didn't falter, wave or even acknowledge me. He just kept his eyes straight on the road, hands on the handlebars, and near silently passed me slowly, save for the slight squeaking of unoiled wheel bearings. I stopped, mouth agape, and watched as he slowly pedaled through the pool of light, given off by the street light, and into the darkness in between the next. I waited a moment, but he didn't pass through on the other side. I was given a pretty tough choice here. Turn around and face my back to this crazy guy. Go through the forest on my left to avoid this clown and likely sprain an ankle and ruin new shoes in the swamp, or walk right up to him in the dark and face this crazy clown. Maybe it was the drunk confidence or the fact that I really hated the stupid media clown trend, but like every horror movie cliche, I chose the latter. I walked cautiously through the pool of yellow light given off by the street lamp towards the edge and looked into the shadows beyond. Beyond the light, I could see the faintest outlines of a silhouette in the distance. I stepped out of the light and into the shadows to get a better view. It was him, alright, his silhouette anyway, just sitting there on his tricycle towards the edge of the road, with his back to me. I walked up cautiously, putting on my iPhone flashlight, which provided next to no light. I got almost close enough to touch him when I smelled it. The stench coming from this guy was terrible. He smelled like a turd and rotten meat. I gagged, almost throwing up. I had gotten this far though and moved closer, touching him on the shoulder. "Hey buddy, are you okay?" The light on my phone was just strong enough for me to make out some features in the dark. His clothing was definitely clown-like and looked remarkably clean. Ridiculous red hair covered his head, and the white skin on the bald part of his head looked like rubber. I stepped closer, realizing it was a mask. Still, he didn't move. "Listen, buddy, I'm not sure what you're trying to do, but..." I touched him on the shoulder again, and he began to slump. Slowly at first, then he picked up speeding, hitting the ground with a wet thud. His bright-colored clown suit burst open, and the mask split, and the smell hit me so hard I threw up, spilling out from his garments, and now all over the street were piles of rotting something, covered in maggots, blood and bugs. In the mass of rotten flesh, I caught sight of a shiny glint, seeing a ring still attached to a finger. From an impossible height above me, one word rang out: "Mordem." I twisted around. There he was again, standing behind me. The fake rubber skin of his mask looked even more haggard in dim light. Where his eyes should have peeked through the eye holes was just darkness, with fluids of rot raining down from them like tears. His hand raised up, holding a small children's bicycle horn. He honked it 3 times. My fight-or-flight system kicked in, and I did the only thing I realized I could do. I landed the hardest punch I've ever thrown, square into his round red nose. The hit landed square in the face, but kept going. I felt like I watched it in slow motion, as I watched my first hit his face, then watched his face bend like rubber, as my fist kept going through, stretching outwards like silly putty. In a flash, I had both of my hands back up, his face still slightly sagging from where I hit, but the elasticity of it quickly bringing it back to form. He began a muffled, throaty laugh. With my fight or flight system still in full force, I did the only other thing I could do. I bolted. As I moved down the street, I heard laughter coming from the woods to the right. I caught quick glimpses of him in different poses, hanging from nooses in the trees or in a crumpled pile on the ground, always looking out at me from the darkness of the woods with his empty eyes. I kept my head down and ran. When I got to my apartment, I unlocked the door and bolted up the stairs. I made it inside, turning every light on, and deadbolted the door behind me. I tried calling my fiancée, but got no answer. Panting, I walked around my apartment. On the kitchen table was a note. "Went out with the girls, might be back later than you. Love, A." Was written on a small scrap of paper. Placed next to it, on my kitchen table, was a bulbous rat clown's nose.